spooky friends. I'm John, your host, and welcome to another episode of Dairyland Frights, the paranormal podcast that covers everything spooky, creepy, and mysterious in the Midwest. My spooky friends, I am so excited because I have a very, very special guest with me, Ed from Door County Trolley Tours. He mainly does the ghost tours, but he says he does all the other tours and the Monster and Mayhem tours. And like I said, I'm super excited to have him. Welcome, Ed.
Yeah. How you doing, John?
I am doing great. So I know you have all these great tours out there, like the Wine, Cocktail, Lighthouse, Family, and so on and so forth. And you've done them all. But tell me a little bit, how long you've been in the company. Tell me a little bit about the tour so my spooky friends can be like, hey, that sounds like something I might want to check out.
Sounds good. Yeah, I've been working for Door County Trolley for 12 seasons now. I started back in 2012. And the ghost tour was where I started. A little bit of scenic tours, but the ghost was my premier choice at the time. And the boss AJ, he was looking to get a few more guys in to help support the originators of the tour. The tour's been going on for between 18 and 20 years. I'm not even exactly sure exactly how many years, but it's been a long time. So I came on 12 seasons ago. And at the time, there were three of us that were doing the tour on a regular basis. Where right now we have seven, or I think there's 8 of us now that do the tours. So it's grown by leaps and bounds since then.
Yeah.
And the tour it's a very unique tour to the area of Fish Creek and Peninsula State Park. So if you know those areas, they're great tourist areas. They have a lot of very rich, excellent history connected to them. And not only do we get the creepy, the ghost sightings, and what people look at as more of a Halloween fair, we get the history of the families that experienced the hauntings. Some of them well over 100 years ago, and we get to bring that all to life at the location where all these things occurred. And then we also have the opportunity to go inside an actual haunted house.
Yes.
And, it is not a Halloween haunted house. I mean, this is a real haunted house that the spirits tend to show themselves in different ways. And they've done that quite a bit. I've experienced quite a few episodes over the years. So
we'll talk about that a little later and stuff. And just to kind of fill in for people, because we have people all over the Midwest who listen to us and all over the world too. So we have people in Australia, we have people in France, Canada, I mean, all over. And one of the things I took the tours, and this is me personally, I've done it 3 times. Because obviously I'm in the paranormal. And one of the things, and then you can tell me what you think about this. People always ask me, like, what should I expect when I'm taking these tours? This is just me personally, and then Ed, you can fill in the gaps here. One of the biggest things I said is history. So you're not going there to be like it's a haunted hayride and like Ed jumps out in a costume, scares you. No, that's not what you're looking for. What you're going to see is, one, they're going to take you around, and I won't spoil it all because I'll let you talk about some of the different places you go to, and stories, obviously. But one of the things I really like I said, was the history. Was that people really, you can tell they love their job. Each time I've taken it, it hasn't been some 16-year-old kid just trying to do it and get through it, which is nothing wrong with that. The other thing too is everyone knows that this area, because we did an episode on Door County, in previous episode that you can check out about all the scary places, and oh my gosh, there's a ton of them. There isn't like Ed's not going to take you to 2 places and then you're going to grab a beer and turn around. That's not going to happen. So it's a very historical, fun, scary, interesting. I don't know, whatever adjectives I could use and adverbs I could use. But am I right on that? So fill my
Well, you're
audience a little bit more with the
right. John, you hit the nail on the head. It's one of those tours that, if you come on it and you're a believer, you're going to love this tour
yes.
because of the things will reveal to you and just the dramatic retelling of the stories and the way they occurred. But if you're a non-believer, it's still an excellent tour, and people
Yes.
still love the tour because of the rich history. And there's quite a few that they come away at the end saying, "Wow, I maybe have to reconsider my beliefs in this area
Yeah.
because of what you revealed to me tonight, and some of the things that we show you along the way, including actual pictures." And people on the trolley, if you're lucky, I don't know, John, if when you were on, if anybody actually got an image in their pictures, but recently
Yeah.
there's been a lot of them.
Wow.
So
We had one lady on my second tour who, and you can talk about this haunted house if you would like, went to the mirror in this. It's owned by this doctor's. Well, this doctor owned it. And I'll let you, you're the expert on it. But point
sure.
is, the person went, and we were told by our guide, it wasn't you, unfortunately, Ed, but he's still a great guy.
You'll have to come back.
Yeah, and we took the picture. The lady took the picture in the mirror, which the guide said, yeah, sometimes somebody's face shows up. So she took it. We all went outside after going in the house. We're all standing around, and all of a sudden the lady goes, "Oh my God!" really loud, and we're like, we're thinking like, "Oh, she okay?" So what it was.
Sure.
So she's like, "Look at this," and we all gather around, and she shows on her phone, and this. My wife is like one of those people who hears something at night and is like, kind of person. So she looks at it, she goes, "Oh my goodness." And I look at it, and it's this face of a woman. You could make out that it's a woman's face it's not her face, because everyone said, "Oh, it's you looking in the mirror." Duh.
Right.
No. It was her face looking in the mirror. And the mirror is, whatever. It's not like a regular mirror, I would say.
Sure.
And it's all and it's like a person was looking out from the mirror, and that's everybody was like, "Oh my gosh!"
That, believe me, over the years that has happened so many times. And the thing that a lot of people tend to question is this the same image everybody gets when they take a picture of this mirror? No, it's not. The
Wow.
images change in different, and every now and then you might get a similar one, but it just amazes me the different facial images that show themselves in these mirrors, in the outside windows. And it can be any time of year. And we'll go through periods where it just explodes. And there are, trolley after trolley after trolley.
Yeah.
And I can talk a little bit later about the what happened after that solar eclipse back in 2017.
Yeah.
It's the one that really solidified my belief in everything that I was doing, and I was the guy leading the tours.
Yeah.
So,
That's amazing to me. And just to let you know, Ed, I've been on about 14 ghost tours, a little bit more than that. I've been in some shut-ins, 4 different shut-ins, to do some investigation work.
Sure.
Now, I've been to Savannah, Georgia, where literally the bathroom, I was told this, and I've told this story before, the bathroom in the Sonic drive-in is haunted. And I always laugh at that because I was going to the bathroom at a Sonic after eating, and I was joking with the guy in Savannah, and I go, "Oh, I bet this bathroom's haunted too." And the guy looks at me and goes, "Yeah." In Savannah, Georgia, literally everything's haunted. It's just crazy. Like everyone has a story. Everyone's like, "Oh, my aunts, my grandma, my whatever." Everything's haunted. And one reason I bring that up is because in Door County, you have to remember one of the things up there is a place called Death's Door. Like you don't name something Death's Door unless, when the ships were coming in, and you can check out our one of our episodes, unless you want to talk about that a little bit Yeah,
Like that.
it's you don't call something death's door if it's something's going on, and there's a lot of whether you want to say paranormal,
Right.
spiritual experience. So, and that's around the area in Door County. I mean, there's just
Right.
every,
Right.
you're right,
Surrounds the county. Part of the big issue up here is we have a lot of limestone. We are an
right.
escarpment. It's part of the Niagara escarpment, but that limestone continues out of the bluffs down underwater.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of a lot of hazards and a lot of reefs and shoals that you need to avoid. And if you
Hmm.
don't know how to navigate the area, you can get in a lot of trouble. And Death's Door happened to be, that was like the doorway into Green Bay,
Hmm.
and it was actually named by the French after they had found the evidence of a Native American battle that occurred up there.
Mm.
And they had found so many skeletons that had been washed up on the beaches of that area. And they heard stories for the few witnesses that were still alive when they came through.
Yeah.
That's when they named it La Porte de Mort. And the British translation of that was Death's Door. And that was actually the suggestion to actually name our county Death's Door County at one point.
Right.
Luckily, we were a long, thin county, and that didn't all fit on the map. So yeah, Death's Door is exciting, and there's a shipwreck story I do tell that's very apropos to that situation. So.
Yes. Yeah, and we'll get into this a lot of the different stories here. So I have to ask you this, Ed. Before you started doing the tours, were you interested in the paranormal? Did you believe in ghosts, or did your mind change once you started doing the tours?
Well, I wasn't all in on the
Hmm.
whole ghost thing. I was very skeptical about all of it, and
Yeah,
just not a non-believer, but somebody who was very intrigued by it and kind of hoping, that boy,
sure.
it'd be neat to have this experience to really confirm my beliefs, but never really always
Hmm.
skeptical of the
Yeah,
whole thing.
yeah.
So it wasn't until that date in basically, well, it was right after August 21st, 1st of 2017, when that solar eclipse occurred,
Hmm.
that we had just an explosion of
Hmm.
facial images that people were taking. We had prior to that, I mean, there might have been 4 or 5 in a week's time. And we
Sure.
do these tours. We start on Memorial Day weekend. We go every night of the week, 7 nights a week, all the way through Halloween, and some years after, depending on what the demand is.
Mm,
And we have a minimum of 2 trolleys per night, and
mm.
we're going at it heavy duty. And all of a sudden, we're getting 4 to 5 per week of these
Wow.
fantastic images, not the explosion that occurred
Mm,
after that solar eclipse. All of a sudden, we're getting 14 to 18 per tour.
hmm.
Everybody taking pictures
Wow.
on the tour was getting a facial images
Yeah,
and
yeah.
different images, different windows. And so I'm thinking, what's going on here? Is it the
Right.
fact iPhones are just getting better? They're getting their quality, they're
Yeah.
picking more of the imperfections in the windows. What's going on here? So I snapped a picture of every single window in that house about 3 days after the 21st. That'd be put me about August 24th.
Okay.
And when I got home that night, I opened up all the pictures I did, and the very first one I took was the very best facial image I have ever seen
Ooh, nice.
anybody coming out of that house. So I saw that as a message to me directly
Mm,
that I better start believing some of
yeah.
what I'm preaching.
That is great. So, Ed, I don't want you to go through all the tour because we got to, make sure that we, tease people so they come on these tours. But I want you to give me before I have you tell me some great favorite stories of yours. Kind of walk people through the tour highlights, like where do we start? Like, where do you end up? And then fill it in with some stories if you could. Kind of like, okay, we stop at the lighthouse and hey John, this is a great story, or this house or whatever.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, we started off at the trolley station, and when we start there, I set up the tour by talking about my favorite location, which is the Noble House.
Oh,
And
yeah, that's a good one.
I set it up because, and that's the second stop of the tour. And the how I set it up is I let people know that it was built by one family, the Alexander Noble family in 1875, and only they lived in that house right up through 1991. It was the granddaughter, Dr. Gertrude Howe. She was quite elderly. She moves out in 91. There's no more Nobles in that line, so that wanted to take over the house. So everything in that house is circa 1870, 1880, 1890.
Wow.
And so when she moved out, it was just this museum just sitting there. And for 5 years, the house sat vacant. And because of that, the grass grew up, the paint peeled off, the
Sure.
trees fell down. It was becoming a big time eyesore. Now, this is right in the middle of Fish Creek on Highway 42,
Yeah.
a very valuable piece of property. So, of course, the real estate developers are eyeing this piece of property out,
Mm.
and they're getting ready. They're making plans. They have
Ugh.
a bulldozer. You know, they're going to build
Yeah.
they're going to build condominiums. They are
Um,
ready to go, and so they make their plans. And when they take pictures, even of the location, they ended up when they got their film back. This was back when they were using 35 millimeter.
sure.
And so they're getting their film back from the developer, and they're getting facial images in the upstairs windows as well.
Oh, wow.
Pictures. So they reported squatters living in the Noble House.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, they didn't think about it as ghosts or
Right.
whatever. No,
Right.
there's squatters living in there. We want to buy it. You know, we want to buy this property.
Yeah.
So to make a long story short with this, I set that up and I let people know about the picture that I took back in 2017. And so I let them, I'm going to wait and see what they come up with first. And then I'm going to show them the picture that I got. So when we get to that second stop, everybody goes in and they get to hear the stories about the that house and over the years, the hauntings. And what happened is the historical society, they swooped in and they put on a fundraiser and they bought that house out from underneath those real estate developers.
Great.
And they maintained it. And they found in the attic, they found some diaries of the young girls that had grown up there.
No, no.
And so in those diaries, they found stories. There's about 5 different stories that all, you know, with the repeat entries from the girls, it all added up into hauntings that were going on in this house. And one of them was about seeing facial images. There'd be an entry. Well, somebody else asked me again today, who's staying with us? I thought only you and your sister there.
Yeah.
We're seeing the face of somebody else looking out of the window, a young boy, a man, whatever, who's in there. So, and that they had so many entries about that became one of the stories they talk about. They had stories about white birds flying over the house and indicating, you know, within 2 weeks of that, every time there was that entry, somebody in the family passed away and they had the funeral.
Wow.
I mean, there were all these different episodes, and you hear all these stories, and you hear about over the years pictures that have been taken that have extra people in them all of a sudden. Or there's a woman in white, which is you might have seen the picture when you were on the tour. You know, the skeletal faced lady floating across the line. I mean, it's some intense stuff, and the rumors of who it is, and you know, the first wife of Alexander Noble. I mean, it's so intriguing, the whole thing. And then when people take the pictures, and if somebody gets an image, I mean, that just solidifies it right there. After hearing stories, it's like, wow. So that's just an awesome stop. It's fun. You get the docent from the historical society who dresses up in period wear, and of course, creepy funereal wear a lot of times. And then every third year in that house, they actually put on a wake for Alexander Noble.
Oh.
For him. So that's something. Can I throw a quick story in here quick? That's
absolutely
not part of our tour. But a few years ago, a friend of mine here, he bought the local funeral home. He's a funeral director. And in the basement, he found a lot of antique embalming tools.
Oh boy.
And equipment. Yeah. So it had the fluid exchange tank. It had those big old needles and all that. And it was dry. It was crusty.
Oh,
so he knew when I was doing the tours. So he said, well, did you check with Doug? And Doug was the first. He was the first docent, the head of the historical society actually at the time. And he said, check with Doug and see if he wants this. And so I did. And Doug right away, he says, get that up here as fast as you can. So I did. I went and I talked to Todd. I got it, brought it up. And it was late in the day. So he set it next to the sink and said, I'm going to clean that up tomorrow. We'll check it. We'll get it into display.
Yeah.
And the next time I saw him, he said, when I came in the next morning, that fluid exchange tank had a reddish brown liquid in it. It was almost full, and it
Oh,
was dripping out of those tubes into the sink.
wow.
I know. Yeah.
Jeez.
So I talked to my friend Todd, and he said that thing was in a box. It was dry. It was crusty. It was a
Oh,
cardboard box.
yeah,
So
yeah.
if there had been any fluid in it when I threw it in my trunk and drove it up there, there's no way
Yeah.
that it was
Right.
moisture. There was none whatsoever.
Right.
So he was as amazed as I was to hear that story. So,
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a great story. Thanks, Ed.
oh yeah, and that's a little bonus for you guys. We don't really every now and then if somebody asks the right question, I'll throw that in, but
Yeah, nice.
we have the time, so that's a good one. So we leave there, and then we work our way to a local inn. Now, the at the time when Alexander Noble purchased the property he purchased it from a guy by the name of Asa Thorpe, who is the founder of Fish Creek. Him and his brothers came there in 1849, and they ended up selling a lot of wood, made a lot of money off selling the wood to steamships because that was the fuel back then. And he
Okay.
put all that money he made into building inns and shops
Sure.
and hotels because he foresaw the tourism that eventually would be coming to Door County.
Right.
And one of the inns that survives is called the Thorpe House Inn. And we go to that house and we tell the story about a young boy. I don't know if you remember the story of Huey Melvin and
Yeah.
how he passed away a tragic death at the age of 5 years old. I'm sorry, just short of his 7th birthday in 1905. And there was a family. He passed away. His parents made a big deal out of going to his grave. He had a lamb stone, back in the day when a kid was buried, they had a sculpted lamb sculpture
Mm,
top of the stone that they would use as the grave marker. And his parents and friends would go out there and they put little trinkets and toys and candy and wildflowers and things on his grave marker every year. It was a tradition. And after his parents died, the relatives and the friends and family from Fish Creek continued to do the same thing. And in 1980, a family from Appleton started camping at Peninsula State Park, and they were out on a hike and they come across this little cemetery.
okay.
And when they're in there, they see the lambstone, which is really neat looking. I mean, it's
Yeah.
ancient. It's got a great, the little boy, so it brings a tear to your eye when you read it.
Mhm.
And then you see all the little toys and the gifts and the coins and the
Yeah.
money and candy that's on there. And it's like, it's wild. And this family, they started doing that. They started putting things on. They came back camping every year. They'd go and visit them
Mm,
until finally they figured, we got to figure this out. What happened to him? What's going on? So they did
right.
a little research and they found they could stay at the Thorpe House Inn, which is where not only did the little boy live, but the place where the little boy died. And so
Yeah.
their first night they're there, the mother awakes to a thumping sound,
Yeah.
and the room's warming, and she looks in the doorway. There's a light, and in the light she sees an image of that small boy.
Oh,
She
wow.
she tries to wake up her husband, but before he can get the sleep out of his eyes, the kid disappears.
Yeah.
So she explains it. She explains it to her kids. The next night it happens again. It happens on
Mhm.
third night, fourth night, fifth, every single night. But the second night, the
Mm.
husband, he was ready for it. And so
Huh.
when she woke him up, he saw it as well. So by the end of that week, the whole family was in
Wow.
on the whole thing. They couldn't
That's
believe it. And they went and
amazing.
they talked to the owner of the house and they asked him if anybody else reported any of this, but nobody did.
Huh.
So they were wondering why were they selected, and when they thought about it, I mean, these were some pretty intelligent folks that
Sure.
didn't, they even admitted we really don't believe in the paranormal, but
Yeah.
all we can come up with after thinking about this for a while is it had to be the ghost of young Huey Melvin.
Yeah.
Had to be, and
Right.
that they believe it. So we tell a very dramatic retelling of that story, and that's a one of my favorites to tell as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. A lot of ghost stories are like that. One of the things I always tell people, like a residual haunting, is typically where, like, yeah, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Here comes a little boy again. You see him and disappears. That kind of might be similar to that, and
Yeah.
that to me is scary because, or I don't know, Ed, if you like other people are like, yeah, I get kind of sick of it. Like every morning you wake up at 3 o'clock, there's a little boy looking at you, and you're like, I can't help him, but he's standing there. What do I do? It can be a little frustrating.
Sure. Yeah. Starting to lose sleep.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. So that's kind of neat, but nobody else, and every now and then we talk to the owner of the inn and that, and nobody else has ever reported seeing the boy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's those folks,
Sure.
and then they stop coming, and that's kind of where the story ends. But it's still unique because you can go into that little cemetery, and on our tour we really can't go in
Yes.
because it's a historic thing. It's right off the main road. The
Yes.
DNR does not want us stopping there. So we try and comply most of the time.
Yeah.
If you go in there on your own, you see the toys and the
Mhm.
candy and the money is all still there. I mean, it's added, people add to it. It's just amazing.
Yes, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's an ongoing story. It's neat. It's kind of tradition. It's become a tradition for everybody. So
Yeah.
that's cool. Now, after we leave that, we work our way. There's another a young girl who died of tetanus and tragically died in her parents' home, and they ran one of the stores in town. And that story is more about the fact that after she passed, she didn't leave the house, and anybody, relatives and that who stayed there, and now one of the local inns owns it, and they've had workers and people staying there who report waking in the night to her cries and her sobs as she,
Oh no.
so that's a scary story as well.
Yeah.
Through it, but it's one of those stories that we've got some of the details, but we don't have every single detail, and we only have the things that were reported or
Sure.
what the family brought to us.
Right.
So that one's not as involved, but it's still a good story. That one gets well, and I'll save the next part. I was going to go on to another part of the tour, but I'll save that till I'm done telling you about the next story.
Sure.
Because then we work our way down to the marina, and we're on the waterfront. And when you get into the fall, when the wind's whipping and the wind's crashing, it's a spectacular sight.
Great experience.
Feeling the whole thing, yeah. And it's and we started talking about a shipwreck, and this is back to that death's door type of thing, where with the limestone, with the islands, with the storms, and the size of the Bay of Green Bay. Actually, it's not that far across. In a speedboat, you can make the crossing in about 20 to 25 minutes. But back in the day with sails or with the steam engines, it took upwards of 2 hours to make that crossing. So, and there are numerous stories of people, even up till this day, that tried to beat a storm back from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan side over here to the Door County side, and not made it. And so that's one of these stories. And this once again goes back to the founder of Fish Creek, Asa Thorpe, the guy that sold the wood that the Noble family bought that property from to eventually build the Noble House. And Asa was pushing some of his sons to build these inns and these hotels in the area. And one of the sons, Freeman, well, he went over to Menominee Marinette, which is where the Menominee River splits northern Wisconsin from the Upper Peninsula, Michigan. And he was there. He took a crossing on the Fish Creek Transportation Company had bought a boat, and they were providing this service. And when they got about halfway back from Menominee back towards Fish Creek, a storm overtook them. And when they left, there were reports the storm was going to occur. And actually, one of Freeman's brothers, Edgar, chose not to take the trip. He said, "You're crazy. You're trying to get that lumber back there. You're trying
smart one.
I'm staying here. If you want to try it, you go right ahead, but I'm not coming along." And sure enough, they had a full load of lumber, 1,000 board feet of lumber. And they're coming back, and there's an island about halfway back called Green Island, right between Egg Harbor and Menominee. And they usually went to Green Island and then made their way northeast towards Fish Creek. And at this point, he takes off and everything's looking good. He's thinking, if I can look to the northwest, and that's where I was told the storm's going to be coming from, everything's going to be good. So he gets back, and all of a sudden he starts seeing flashes of lightning over his head, and then he starts hearing the roll of thunder. He looks up to the northwest, but those skies are all clear. So then he shifts his gaze to the rear of the boat, the Erie Ackley. And there he sees a storm gathering out of the southwest, and it's
Wow.
racing at him at a high rate of speed.
Sure.
He knows big trouble. He knows he's got to do something to avert the danger. So he attempts to turn the nose of the Hackley directly into the oncoming storm, but he never completes the turn. The boat is smashed by a wall of water. It heaves, it lurches, and cracks in half, and down it goes. 185 feet right down to the bottom of Green Bay. Yep. It took all of 2 minutes for it to sink.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy.
And 11 people passed away. It's, to this day, it's still the largest loss of life in a maritime disaster on the Bay of Green Bay in its history.
Wow.
So 11 people died.
Terrible.
Only 7 are recovered. And the most of those that die suffer that most horrific death of hypothermia.
Mm.
The ones,
Yeah.
they just outright drown. And then 8 survived, but they were able to cling to some of the wreckage.
Sure.
Some of the lumber, a couple of them were able to work their way back to Green Island. They were rescued by a steamship the next day. But the pilot house and cabin of that boat floated north, ended up right at the foot of Eagle Bluff in Peninsula State Park.
Mm.
That's when they found not only the cabin, the pilot house, the bell still intact in the house, and every single life jacket still hanging on its hook. It sunk so fast they couldn't get one off the hook.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It was quite a tragedy.
Yes.
So the story, as it goes, is that Freeman Thorpe was on that boat, and he had a tough go of it. But his brother Roy, as he's awaiting the arrival of the ship to help move all that lumber up to the home site, well, he knows it's going to be Freeman left for 3 days. He knew it was going to be the third day that they'd show up with all the lumber, so he didn't worry too much about it. But he was anticipating everything. When Freeman bought the lumber, he actually was able to get a hold of John and get a message, or to Roy and get a message to him and let him know exactly what time to be at the dock to have the horse and the cart and everything ready to haul that lumber up. And so Roy was ready to go. But that night, the night before the Hackley sank, Roy ends up having a dream. And in the dream, it's him getting on the deck of the Hackley, not Freeman. And it's him standing there when the wall of water hits. He's smashed. He's thrown into the water. He's struggling for his life. He awakes in a cold sweat. Fear grips his soul, and his first inclination, call Freeman, get a hold of Freeman, let him know, don't get on that boat. How bad's going to happen, But then he convinces himself that, hey, this is only a dream.
Yeah.
This doesn't really matter. This isn't real.
Yeah.
This is what's going on here. So he just lets the thought pass, and then he attempts to get back to sleep. But then the dream revisits one more time, just as the first time. Him standing on the deck, thrown into the icy waters of the bay. In those waters, once again, he's struggling for his life. Once again, he awakes in that cold sweat. Once again, his first inclination, contact Freeman, let him know not to get on that boat. But once again, he just lets the thought pass. And then he never sees him alive again. 3 days later, 2 miles south of there, washed up on the the icy rocks of Hat Island, he found his icy blue body still clinging to a piece of his own lumber.
Oh my, that's just
yeah, it was rough.
Yes, that is tragic. That is, maybe you should have listened to the dream,
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, it haunted Roy for the next 16 days short of 30 years. So is what he.
Oh boy!
It haunted him for quite a while. And after the tragedy occurred, he felt terrible. But 3 days later, he mentioned something to a friend of his who happened to be a writer. And 1 week after the Hackley sank, a story appears in the Door County Advocate called Roy's Dream. And it's all about that dream. And that's where we got a huge amount of this story from. And then we the accounts of it. We got the family relatives that gave us, how families will elaborate on these
Yeah.
stories over
Yeah.
and we of course don't elaborate one bit on any of it. So,
Yeah, you don't have to. You don't have to. That's a great story.
well, it is. And the part um after, tell the story, we discussed the fact that fishermen have been plying those waters, commercial fishermen, for well over 100 years.
Yeah.
To this day, they will not go near the site where that boat went down.
Really?
It's not out of respect for the dead. They hear the cries and the screams of those
Yeah.
spirits that day.
Ugh.
They avoid the area at all costs.
Mm.
They've seen images of their faces underneath the surface of the water.
Oh,
Stories passed down, right, from family to
yeah,
family.
I'm
And
out of there.
it has nothing to do with respect, though. It all has to
Yeah,
do
yeah.
with fear. They know
Oh, yeah.
it's coming their way, and
Yes.
so they avoid it. And everybody
I don't
knows,
blame them.
how suspicious mariners have been over the years, and
Oh,
that's
yeah, yeah, right, yeah.
this
Very
day.
superstitious, and I don't blame them if I saw a face staring up at me from underneath the water. Yeah, I'm gonna a land speed record. I'm out of there.
You got it. Now, one of the cool things that happened, and I will share this, is that back in the 80s, there were some scuba divers went down and searched the site of the wreckage. They actually found two sets of remains.
Ugh,
And they brought those remains up to the surface and they sat in a mortuary here in Sturgeon Bay for a long time.
okay.
It was actually the same funeral home that friend of mine purchased that I told you
Yeah,
about, the earlier one. It was
yeah.
Davis. Guy's name was Davis Mortuary. And he's the one who convinced the Historical Society here in Sturgeon Bay to give give them a proper burial. The two sets of remains, they didn't have DNA. They couldn't tell exactly which two of the four they were. But they still, Sturgeon Bay put on a very classy Victorian style funeral for those folks. And I live just down the block from the cemetery that they buried him at, the grave markers there.
Yeah.
And I walk by it almost on a daily basis.
Great.
It's got a lot of the history of that event, but the boat and the families from Fish
Yeah.
Creek, how they're
Yeah.
doing.
It's a very, very nice story. Wow. Interesting.
So you ready to move on?
Yes.
Because the next stop to me really brings it all together.
Okay.
We go to the cemetery and we get to meet every single character in these stories. And that's the beauty of this tour, I think, over a lot of them that I've been on.
Yeah.
It's getting to actually hear the story, get the history,
Right.
hear about the haunting, maybe get an image, a facial image that maybe matches one of these folks. And then you go to the cemetery and get the stories at their graveside.
Yeah.
About their burials and when they were buried and how things that happened along the way, just the process and the cemeteries that they were in, and how one of the cemeteries became part of the park, and how nobody's allowed to be buried there now, but how people still sneak in and still are able to get in and do things and have experiences there. And then we go to an active cemetery that was established back in 1890, and you get to meet all the characters in that cemetery as well. So, and that's, a lot of people love it. And I have an experience last week where I had a gentleman take a picture out of the back of my trolley as we were leaving this cemetery. And it was when that supermoon was going on.
Oh, sure.
And so it was just unbelievably bright. And as we he came up after the tour and he showed me, he said, "This is what I took after." I said, "Wow, that's really a neat looking shot." I said, "You got some of those gravestones and look at the aura around them. And there's a tinge of red in the background from the red lights of the trolley as we're pulling away." It was just really a neat picture.
Yeah.
And he said, "Yeah, but look at what's above that grave marker, that gravestone." And I said, I said, "You got an orb?" He said, "Yeah, I did." He said, "I not only got an orb, keep an eye on it as I expand the size of this picture."
Yeah.
And it expanded the picture right in front of me. That orb turned into an elderly gentleman's face.
Oh, I love it.
Very well defined.
Yeah.
Very easy to recognize. And I've been using it on my tour every night over the last week.
Yeah.
And it's pretty, I said, just keep an eye there and there you go. So it's another example.
Yeah.
It's not just in the Noble House, but here we are at the
Right.
cemetery. And with
Yeah.
these new phones, we've been getting orbs for years, even
Sure.
with 35 millimeter film.
Uh-huh.
But with the cell phones, you can snap your picture, you can expand the size
Mhm.
and see what's in those orbs. That's
Right.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
very
that is cool. When I was there, my experience was when I was taking pictures, I got near, I believe the doctor and his children. I don't know if I'm right on that because it's been a little while since I've done. When I tried to take the picture, my phone went dead. It was fully charged. It's just dead. And
ah,
then when I got back on the trolley, it came back.
right.
And then I had my wife do it. Her phone just malfunctioned. She was like, why isn't this not taking a picture? And then we got back on the trolley. Our phones were fine.
Right. Right. And I remember times when I first started, I'd watch somebody change the batteries in their cameras
Yeah.
as we are, sitting at the trolley station getting ready to leave. And they'll walk into the Noble House and they'll come out all frustrated and upset. My camera died. As soon
Yeah.
as I walked in that house, the camera died. I got nothing. And within 20 minutes of leaving the house,
Mhm.
everything working fine.
No, it was working fine.
Right. And it happened many times.
Yeah.
And even with cell phones now, you'll get people all of a sudden
Yep.
everything's fuzzed out.
Yep.
They're, and every other picture they took on the tour is, the clarity is perfect.
Right.
And inside the house, everything's fuzz. Here's another one for you about, I think it was 6 years ago. I had a guy come out of the house. He wasn't taking pictures. He had his phone in his pocket, and they were in the room where you hear the stories. And there's a
Yeah.
picture of Alexander Noble
Mhm.
on one of the side cupboards in that room. And he came out and he said, I said, "Hey, you taking pictures?" He says, "No," but I looked at my phone when I came out of the house, and look what's on it. He had a picture of Alexander Noble on his phone, and he had never taken his phone out of his pocket.
That's amazing.
So yeah. So that was pretty interesting. I never forgot that. I've shared that with people quite a bit too. So
Oh, that is amazing. So anything else with the tour you want to bring up before I have a couple questions for you?
oh sure. Well, after we leave the lighthouse, the cemetery, we end at a lighthouse, but we have three great lighthouse stories for you as well. And I won't go into detail on those because those are ones that you really got to be there.
Yes.
My favorite one, though, if you remember Minnie Cocombs,
Yes.
the lady who, yeah, and that's one. I mean, if you ever get a chance to come on this tour for that story alone, it's a great story, just a great and a very happy story.
Yeah.
So,
Why don't
right.
you tell that? Why don't you tell that story? Why don't you give kind of a brief,
That's a good
hint
one.
to our audience here? So,
Well, Emily Hesh was a young lady while she was very intrigued by lighthouses, but her parents had passed away, and she back in 1863 she started spending the summers with her uncle. Her uncle's name was Henry Stanley, who just happened to be the first keeper of the light at the Eagle Bluff Lighthouse in Peninsula State Park. And so spend the summers following him around and pretty much mimicking everything that he did. Now he started at Eagle Bluff in 1868 when it opened, but that her summer vacations just continue. Where he went, she went. So he served that lighthouse all the way until 1883 when he was named the keeper of the light at the Sherwood Point Lighthouse, which is on the other side of Sturgeon Bay, opening up right into Green Bay. And that lighthouse, well, he served that one quite well all the way till 1898. And that's where he passed away of natural causes. And when he passed away, after all those years of Minnie following him around and, learning how to keep light and mimicking everything that he did, I mean, she knew everything about it. They could not have found a better person to hire as the lighthouse keeper, but they didn't hire her. You know who they hired?
mm,
Her husband, William,
okay.
because Minnie had a fatal flaw. You know what it was?
She's a woman.
Yes, back in the day. So they hired him as the lighthouse keeper. They hired her as the assistant lighthouse keeper.
Mm,
And so, and I'm not exactly sure on the accuracy of this, but I think there were quite a few other women whose husbands had died and been appointed lighthouse keepers. But as far as outright appointment to one of these positions, and as the assistant lighthouse keeper, the United States Life Saving Service actually appointed her, which was a huge deal.
Yeah.
Because of that, I mean, she took a lot of pride in that she was appointed and she was actually the keeper. That's just she just didn't have the title.
Right.
And so she kept that lighthouse spotless. And despite the lack of guests who came out there, because back in the day, Door County didn't have roads everywhere. Everything was settled by water.
Right.
So you weren't traveling, by paths or roads. You were coming in by boat. So if you're going to visit the Kokums, that's where you're going to see them. So anybody who did visit, they all said the same thing. Minnie, that lighthouse, it's spotless. Everything is always in its place. Place for everything in its place. And if you did visit Minnie, one of her prized possessions was a tea set that somebody had given her years prior. So you were going to definitely have tea when you were with Minnie. That was her opportunity, to do it. And so her and William, they did serve that lighthouse. They did it for quite a few years, about 30 years. But in 1928, when she was getting out of bed to start her daily chores, Minnie, she never made it to the door. So she passes away. She's buried just down the block from me as well. I see her on a regular basis, at least her stone, because Minnie's not in that cemetery. We all know where Minnie's at. She stayed at that lighthouse.
Right.
And that's not just based on local lore and legend, because during World War II, the Coast Guard took over all the lighthouses on the Great Lakes for security purposes. And when they did that, well, accurate logs had to be kept. And in those logs are many instances of things which can only be attributed to Minnie Kokums.
Yes.
So among them, in the middle of the night, at that darkest, quietest time of the night, you could hear the rattling of a cup and a saucer from that tea set of Minnie's. So
that's great.
Quite a few of those entries. And I'll tell you what, keepers logs in the lighthouses, those weren't anything to be messing around with or joking about. That had to be accurate stuff,
Yes.
And so then in 1983, on the 100-year anniversary of the building of that lighthouse, the Coast Guard, they finally exit. And at that point, it's converted to become a facility for active and retired military. You could pay a nominal fee. You could stay at that lighthouse. So in one of the stays, there was a Coast Guard officer who was married with children. He put in for a week's leave, stay at the Sherwood Point Lighthouse, both requests granted. So when the date comes, they load up the family. Sturgeon Bay, they come, they move into the lighthouse, and then they set it immediately to sea all of Door County. And County, you've been here, you know how big it is.
Yes.
But these folks attempted to see all of Door County in one day.
Not going to happen.
No, 72 miles long, 300 feet of coastline, not going to happen. So when they get home that night, they are all dog tired. The kids are cranky. They feed them all dinner. They put them to bed. They leave that cleanup till morning. But in the middle of the night, at that darkest, quietest time of the night, they awake to that sound of a cup and a saucer. But the Coast Guard gentleman, was not afraid at all because he had read all those logs prior.
Oh, there you go.
So instead of getting freaked out, he just yelled out into the night, "Hey, Minnie, you're going to make all that racket. Well, least you could do is just clean up our kitchen." Well, upon waking the next day, guess what? That kitchen was spotless. Everything was in its place.
I love it.
The kitchen table.
Love it.
One saucer.
So
at that point, I'm going to ask you to just sit and dream of having your own Minnie Kokums. There you go.
Yes, and that's excellent. So before we wrap up, do you have just a real quick experience that maybe shook you a little bit, or maybe made you laugh, or I don't know, just something that you thought of like, this is kind of what I tell everybody. This is, on my tours. This is what happened.
Yeah. Well, the one I shared with you already about taking
Oh,
that picture,
yeah.
that one shook me quite. That one really changed my thinking on the whole thing. So that was pretty cool. But I can tell you one of my early years when
Yeah.
I was doing this, actually it was in my first year. It's called the House in Mourning, Mourning, and
Mhm.
they do it, like I told you before, they every 3 years they do a wake for Alexander Noble
Right.
where they have a coffin from an actual coffin from back in the 1890s, and
Amazing.
have all the funeral clothes, all the period accurate
Wow. Wow.
funeral clothing and everything,
Amazing.
mannequins. It's a really neat scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's going on, and I had a lady with an SLR camera and digital SLR. And I'm in the room at this time with her, and I'm watching her take pictures. And I go, well, did you get anything good? And she says, well, just hang on a second. Let me finish this. And she took a series of 3 pictures, 3 snaps in a row. And we get out of the room, and I said, okay, let's see what you got. And she shows me the first one. It's the coffin picture of Alexander, the bouquet of flowers on top, the whole deal. Nothing out of the ordinary. The second picture is a big mist of steam right in front of the coffin. The outline of a gentleman's profile with a beard looked exactly like Alexander Noble.
Oh,
And then the third picture, back to nothing again.
wow.
Just,
I
just
love
what was there. Yeah.
it's great.
And that was right. That guy, it was like, wow, this is real. This sounds
Yeah.
something. That was amazing to me.
Yeah.
And
That is amazing.
why I didn't fully believe at that point, I don't know. It took that
Right.
picture, a few years later to get me, but
Yeah. It's like I tell people, it's not that it's okay if you don't believe, but just give it a chance, right?
right.
Take a look at some things and make that decision once you see some evidence. Because I get it. There's a lot of, I don't know how you would say, fakes and everything, and I get it. But it's the reason I believe is just the mystery, right? The not knowing what's out there. Sometimes not
Right.
knowing is a good thing, right? And
Right.
believing in what you believe, that's fine, right? It doesn't hurt anybody.
Oh, exactly.
Right.
And that's where a lot of people come to, like you'll have spouses where the wife believes everything, the husband doesn't believe a
Right.
thing, a little skeptical, you'll hear him going back and forth. But I was good. I say, hey, are you religious? And usually it's, yeah, we go to church. We just said, well,
There
is
you
it
go.
all about the afterlife? What are you thinking? I
Yeah.
mean, you got to think about that.
Yeah.
There's something there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Ed, I could talk to you for hours, and maybe we will someday. I would
Yeah.
love to have you back, sometime if you would grace us with your presence again, because all these stories were amazing. I loved everything, and obviously, I can tell you love your job, which is
Oh, yeah.
thank you because we need people like you to keep telling the stories and spreading that message so people can, see what it's like with the history again, when I went, that's what I loved, and people will love it. So I will put everything out, where they can find you and everything, and say hi to Ed from me,
Yeah. Well,
John. You
okay. Yeah. Excellent.
and anything else you want to say, Ed? Anything you want to before we go?
Yeah, I just want to commend the group of guys that we have that do these stories, and that with the Murder and Mayhem tour as well,
Yeah,
and the effort that they put in, because they are all just as enthusiastic as I am about it, and they really love. Everybody loves their jobs, and it's an amazing thing. So a big thank you to AJ as well, who
yeah,
started this company back in the year 2000, and gave us all the opportunity to do this, because he started us out and said, well, these are the stories, go get them. you know
yeah.
and so we could research, we find out new information.
Mhm.
We have relatives, we have people that come on these tours that they've heard different versions of the stories. They give us other things that we can look at and say, oh, that
Mhm.
connects this part of the story with that story. So these stories are very dynamic, and they're
Yeah,
constantly evolving. So
yes,
it
absolutely.
yeah.
And just to tell my spooky friends out here, We didn't even get to the Murder Mayhem tour because there's so much just in the Ghost tour. But we will hopefully, Ed, I can have you back on sometime when you maybe after the season, or if you have some time, I'll send you a message and we can talk about that, because I'm sure you have some great stories about the Murder Mayhem tour.
Yeah.
Yeah. So excellent. So we always end every episode by saying, say hi to your ghosts. So say hi to your ghosts. We're always friendly. And stay spooky, Ed.
You got
Loved
it.
it. This was a great show. I look forward to talking to you down the road.
Thanks for having me on, John. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, Ed. Bye.
Take care. Yep. Bye-bye.